Alright, so it felt weird to do my normal intro because this is such a serious video, so we're just gonna go ahead and jump into the topic. I think it would be a good idea to do an update to all of the various cases we have been talking about for the past year because it has been a lot. There has been Marilyn Manson and Armie Hammer, Australian BDSM cults, and with all of that, it is hard to keep up with each individual story in any great amount of detail. Obviously, my focus has been on Marilyn Manson, but just because I haven't been talking about as much those other situations and cases doesn't mean nothing's been happening. So today, I want to revisit all of the various cases we have been covering in 2021 and now into 2022 and just get us all up to date and talk about what has been happening in the meantime. And the first one I want to do that with is Armie Hammer. So a quick refresher on what was going on with Armie Hammer. Shortly before the accusations against Marilyn Manson came out in February of 2021, there was first a story against Armie Hammer that came out in January. He was the first celebrity of the year to face SA allegations, which is not a title you want to have. While many in the public eye recall this as being a story about a C-list actor who apparently had a secret cannibalism fetish, it actually went much deeper than that. There were dubious BDSM relationships, there was coercion, cheating, SA, carving his first initial into someone's abdomen allegedly, and that is just barely scratching the surface. Now, it seemed like originally this was going to go the same way as the Manson allegations are going now, which would be to court because one of the main accusers, Effie, was working with famed attorney Gloria Allred, who is most well known, I think, right now for having worked with 28 of the accusers against Bill Cosby. They had a whole press conference that was widely speculated about, in which it really seemed like they were going to be moving forward with some kind of litigation. There was an investigation that got opened by the Los Angeles Police Department, and then just nothing. So what actually ended up happening? Well, Armie Hammer, for his part, checked himself into an addiction treatment facility in Florida, which he stayed at for the better part of a year before releasing himself back in December. He was cut from basically every movie role he was slated to be a part of, except for Death on the Nile, which had its release delayed until February of this year. It ended up being a flop anyways, and who knows what that means for his acting career. And as for the case, it seems that nothing ended up materializing. In December, back around the same time that Armie Hammer left the treatment facility, the LAPD announced that they had actually finished their 9-month investigation into the allegations against him. When TMZ broke the story, their source had this to say about the matter. Armie Hammer's alleged rape investigation has wrapped up and law enforcement is sending its findings to the DA. But we're told the actor isn't likely to face any charges. Sources with direct knowledge tell TMZ the LAPD is forwarding the case to the LA County District Attorney's Office now that it's completed its probe, which was launched way back in March. We're told the case isn't strong and will probably not result in any charges being filed against Armie. It's unclear if the reason behind this is lack of credibility of potential witnesses or lack of particular evidence backing up the claims. In any case, the DA's office will have final say over the matter. And I feel like this last line is important to highlight because I don't think a lot of people realize this. It's not up to the accusers to determine if something goes forward or not in a criminal case. It is up to the local DA's office. When they review the case, they review the findings, they get to decide, is there enough in this to be able to move forward? And so often with cases like this, there is very little physical evidence, typically no or very few witnesses that may or may not be biased. And of course, it usually ends up turning into basically a he said, she said, and that is really not going to be a strong situation to go off of if you want to get a criminal conviction against such a relatively high profile person. And I think in particular with this scenario, because there is the complexities of having a cannibalism fetish and BDSM and consensual non-consent play, it would be really hard for a regular jury of someone's peers to be able to look at that and understand the nuance and levels of sort of novel consent practices in that are maybe different from what they would be experiencing, and it would just end up being really, really complicated. So I'm not entirely shocked that this appears to not be going forward, because since that information was sent to the DA now several months later, there hasn't been anything further. That doesn't mean there won't be anything. There may end up being civil litigation, possibly. There may end up actually being something criminal. Maybe it's just taking them a long time to decide. I don't know, but it seems relatively unlikely that anything else further is going to go on at this point, and that the case is sort of going cold. Now, in regards to this, neither Armie Hammer nor Effie have made any public statements. Gloria Allred was quoted by the Daily Mail as saying no comment when asked about the outcome of this investigation. However, Armie Hammer's representation had this to say when they spoke with Variety. There was never a case. A lot of people think there was. There was never a lawsuit, never a criminal proceeding. The media are obsessed with that matter. It never turned into litigation or into a criminal charge against anyone. That was a misconception. So what happens now? Do both parties try to move on and forget about this? Does Armie Hammer try to get back into acting in a couple of years? Does he get back together with his sort of ex-wife? Is there going to be civil litigation like I mentioned earlier? Who knows? Only time will tell, and definitely in scenarios like this, time is going to be a big factor. Now, moving on to our second story, the next thing that I want to catch up about is the Australian BDSM cult, and that is not even that much of an exaggeration. This is about the House of Cadifor, which was ran by James Robert Davis. Now, I am not going to go into the full story here because it is extensive, so I will link my previous videos about this down below if you want to know. But to give a quick summary here, basically the House of Cadifor was ran by James Robert Davis, and he was a self-professed BDSM master who had this big communal household with all female submissives and slaves that were serving him and providing for him financially through their sex work, as well as potentially defrauding the Australian higher education system. He also seemed to have a thing for stolen valor and going after girls that were still in their high school uniforms. So, yikes. It gets pretty bad when you get into the details. And though I think this was not as widely publicized, at least in American media, compared to Armie Hammer or to Marilyn Manson, I think this one is actually more important because this involves an actual real member of our BDSM community that was going to public events, that was recruiting people from places like FetLife to be part of this harem. He treated himself as kind of this educator. He wanted to have a mini-series done about the household that he ran. He tried to do a GoFundMe or a Kickstarter for it that didn't end up working out. And he was kind of this like kink influencer micro celebrity. And to hear that, you know, there were relationships of his that were consensual, it does seem, and other ones that very much were not, that is disturbing and something that does need to be examined, because though situations to this degree are not common, obviously, something like this on minor scales, certain parts of the alleged behavior, the way that things were ran, do happen in the kink scene, and it is something that we do need to talk about. But before I get into that whole spiel, we should get back into the actual updates themselves, which is compared to Armie Hammer, which kind of like went nowhere and then fell off of a cliff. This was relatively fast-tracked into the Australian legal system because a big part of this case was I don't know if you could call it a sting operation, but there was a very large investigation that was done by law enforcement there. They searched his house from absolute top to bottom. There are photos of them searching his house, going through laptops, getting cameras, and it was just really, really extensive. And so right away, he went to jail, and he was facing a number of charges that ranged from slavery to illegal possession of a firearm, and of course, SA, like in all of these cases. And the slavery charges were actually dropped and replaced with different charges, and there were a lot of them to go through. And because he was in jail, the next step that he needed to do as part of this process was to do a brief of evidence with basically a case conference with his legal representation. And this originally had a deadline of, I believe, back in August. The point of all this being is that when you are getting alleged of doing a crime, there is the fact that you need to know what you are being accused of doing and what all of that looks like, and especially with a case like this where there are so many charges, that's going to take a lot of time to sort through. So they needed to do this within 6 months, I believe, of him going to jail with that original deadline of August. And then it was August and nothing happened. And then it was November and nothing happened. And it took until February for there to be any movement on this, to the point where the lawyers actually sent him a laptop with that information to jail in what I can only describe as a series of fuck games between his lawyers and possibly the jail. It got to the point where back in April, still nothing had happened, and his legal representation was saying, oh, well, the reason why we don't have any pleadings yet is because, well, we actually have missing evidence that we need. And the other side was like, what are you talking about? What missing evidence? We have never heard about this before until right now in front of the judge. And the judge got so pissed off, he was like, you know what? If you all do not get this sorted out by fucking today, I am dropping all these charges and this case is going to go nowhere. And that could be having incompetent legal representation. It could also be a calculated act on purpose, because with that series of games they were playing, it does really seem like all of these delays and dragging things out and absolutely doing nothing for as long as possible was because they were hoping to get everyone involved so mad that they gave up and decided that it wasn't worth it. However, for some reason, this judge managed to finally be able to kick these people in the pants enough to get them to move forward, and he did actually end up submitting his pleas, which were a combination of guilty and not guilty, which we don't really know which ones go with what charges yet at this point, but it does seem like now they are going to be able to move forward. And according to those that are more familiar with the Australian legal system, it does seem like trial now is going to happen in maybe a year or two. Of course, there's going to be all kinds of hearings, and I don't know what else they do over there in Australia for legal stuff, but it is a very long process to actually get to trial. And now finally they have slowly but surely just crawled to the edge of even starting that process. So we do have quite a ways to go yet, but it is comparatively farther along than almost any of the other stories that we have been covering. So not a really glamorous update here, other than some sort of, tomfoolery with the judge, I suppose. But that is what's going on with James Robert Davis and the House of Cadifor. There are other people in the House of Cadifor that are facing their own legal consequences. However, I have less concrete updates for those accusations, and when those do come out, I will be covering them in a future video. So, you know what? If nothing else, it is nice to think that somebody in one of these sordid tales is going to get their day in court eventually at some point. But moving on, we have our final story, our grand finale, which, as per usual, is Marilyn Manson. In particular, the defamation case between him and Evan Rachel Wood. Now, in my last video update I did about this, it was over an hour long, and it was entirely focused on Evan Rachel Wood's documentary that she made, as well as the beginnings of this defamation case. And I was waiting to get updates about that. I was expecting there to be a formal legal response to that defamation case from her legal representation. However, that hadn't happened yet, and I did want to eventually cover the story, so I kind of released that one a little bit earlier than I wanted to. But now it seems like we may actually have some updates. It has been harder to find updates about Marilyn Manson and Evan Rachel Wood and all of the other lawsuits going on there as well, for that matter. I don't really know why. I think maybe in part it's because the media has been really focused on the ongoing litigation between Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, and so just the spotlight has been removed for now. We'll kind of see what happens there in the next few weeks, but it does seem like some things have been happening. I say seems because I wasn't able to find the paperwork myself, but Spectrum News 1, which is a cable news organization, did report on this story update back in April. And they had this to say. On Thursday, April 28th, Wood's attorneys filed court papers seeking dismissal of portions of Manson's complaint on First Amendment grounds. In a sworn declaration, Wood, 34, challenged the lawsuit allegations of the 53-year-old Manson, whose real name is Brian Hugh Warner. The statements I have made about the abuse inflicted by Manson are true, Wood says. I have no reason to doubt the accusations made against Manson by other survivors. A hearing on Wood's motion is scheduled for December 13th before Judge Teresa A. Boudet. So it might be a long time yet before we see any further details about this defamation case come out, but we should be careful to remember that Evan Rachel Wood is not the only one that has made allegations against Marilyn Manson, though the popular media and my comment section sometimes likes to forget that. One of the other main accusers against Manson is Esme Bianco, who is currently dealing with her own litigation with Marilyn Manson. And there was recently an update to her filing as well, which added some new information and added, actually, I believe, a new charge as well for tortious interference, stating that she was cut from an ongoing project with Deftones, she believes, because of interference by Manson as retaliation for the lawsuit that she filed. Quote, he used his power and influence in the entertainment industry to interfere with Ms. Bianco's ability to continue working with Deftones. Defendant Warner's actions were intended to cause the contract with Ms. Bianco to be breached by Deftones when they refused to utilize her images, she alleges in her filing. Bianco claims the alleged breach resulted in reputational damage and loss of future economic opportunity with Deftones, and, according to the filing, Warner committed an independently wrongful act that was designed to disrupt the relationship between Bianco and the group. Bianco tells Rolling Stone she believes, quote, the consensus has been reached that it was easier to cut me than to deal with Brian. Someone in Deftones' camp decided to scrap me because of Brian calling them. Representation for both Deftones and Manson declined comment when they were reached out to by Rolling Stone. Esme Bianco, though, for her part, had some more strong words to add when she was contacted for comment. Quote, by continuing to threaten my career opportunities, Warner again demonstrates that even amidst criminal investigation and civil litigation, he will stop at nothing in an attempt to silence his victims. Bianco tells Rolling Stone. The complicity of those who enable these intimidation tactics demonstrates why survivors are so hesitant to come forward. If those who hold power to stand up to abusers choose not to, survivors will stand alone. This is further evidence of Mr. Warner's continued attempts to intimidate Ms. Bianco into silence, adds Jay Ellwanger, the attorney representing Bianco and Ashley Morgan Smithline, who is also suing Warner for sexual assault and human trafficking, among other charges. The threats and coercion must stop, and our hope is that today's filing will help inform Mr. Warner that there will be consequences for his actions. And so that is where we are currently at with all of these cases. They are very much still all in progress, although possibly with the exception of Armie Hammer most likely, but there will be more updates yet to come. I do want to briefly mention, because I haven't really talked about this on my channel except for during live streams, that Marilyn Manson's name has been dropped several times now in the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case, although the most that Johnny has really said to that is that, oh yeah, we did coke together sometimes, and one time I gave him a pill to shut him up, which the way he said that sounded so convincing that I am sure that story has at the very least a grain of truth to it. Now, I am not planning on covering that case because it has been going on for so long, and there are so many other voices I think that are more professional, more involved covering that one. I hope someday they will also do that for the Marilyn Manson case, but you know, fingers crossed on that one. And I think it's interesting they are trying to connect Marilyn Manson, which, by the way, they call him Marilyn Manson in court. Johnny calls him Marilyn Manson. So if you've been like, oh, why do you call him Brian Warner? The man that had him be the godfather to his child doesn't even call him Brian Warner. So I don't know what you want me to do with that information. But regardless, it is interesting again to see that they are trying to sort of connect these two cases maybe, and maybe kind of make some kind of inference there about either Johnny's behavior or Manson's behavior because of their connection. I don't really know where this is going to end up going because we are only like halfway through that trial at this point, but we'll see. If anything really big and explosive comes out about something between Johnny and Marilyn Manson, we'll talk about that when and if that happens. I do think it's interesting that though they mention Marilyn Manson quite a bit, Evan Rachel's name has never come up, as far as I can tell, and I've watched every minute of this trial. I don't remember her name ever coming up, and so, again, I don't really know what to make of that necessarily, but there does seem to be some kind of linking by the attorneys between these two people for some reason. Again, we don't quite know what that is. Anyways, these are all of the updates that I have for these cases today. If you all have anything that you want to add, any questions, anything else you would like to see me cover, I may be convinced to cover at least some of the Johnny Depp Amber Heard litigation. If you really, really want me to, let me know down below. If you want to make sure to not miss out on any of the videos from me and you enjoy stuff like this, you want to keep up with all of these cases, please be sure to subscribe. I also make videos twice a week about all sorts of kink and BDSM related topics that are educational and more lighthearted, not just going over criminal allegations of abuse, but you know, if that's also your thing, we do talk about that as well. And finally, if you want to support my channel, the best we can do that is with Patreon. A link to that will be down below. If you do already support over there, thank you so, so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.